For 12 straight days, someone followed Lucky Luciano through New York without being noticed. Not for hours, not for a night. Nearly 2 weeks of watching his movements, his habits, the places where his protection thinned and his confidence showed. In the Mafia, that kind of access usually means only one thing. The target is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. This wasn't a rushed contract or a desperate move. The order was deliberate. The man chosen to carry it out was patient, disciplined, and experienced enough to understand that killing a boss isn't about pulling the trigger. It's about choosing the right moment. And the right moment came. More than once. Luciano was exposed, unguarded, and completely unaware that death had been walking behind him day after day. But the shot never came. No struggle, no interruption, no mistake. Just a decision that should not have existed in the world Luciano ruled. An assassin with time, access, and opportunity. Who chose not to fire. In organized crime, refusing to kill when ordered is more dangerous than failing. It raises a question no one once asked. What did he see that made walking away feel safer than pulling the trigger? Because this wasn't mercy. And it wasn't fear of the act itself. It was fear of what killing Lucky Luciano would unleash. A fear that grew stronger the longer the assassin watched him move through the city as if untouchable. Not reckless, not careless, but certain. This is the story of the hit that never happened, of 12 days that should have ended a life, and instead strengthened a legend. And of the moment when one man realized that killing Lucky Luciano might be the most dangerous move he could ever make. When the order to eliminate Lucky Luciano was issued, it came without urgency, and that was what made it dangerous. There was no countdown, no demand for speed, no pressure to act immediately. This was not a revenge killing or a panic response. It was a calculated decision made by people who believed time was on their side. The instruction was simple: follow him, learn him, and end it when the moment was clean. The man selected for the job was not a street gunman or a hot-headed enforcer. He was chosen because he could wait. Because he understood that the most valuable weapon in the underworld is patience. Anyone can fire a gun. Few can disappear into a routine without leaving a trace. Whoever placed the order wanted certainty. Luciano had survived before. He had been underestimated before. This time, there would be no mistakes caused by haste or noise. 12 days was not a coincidence. It was an allowance. Enough time to confirm patterns, to rule out unpredictability, to ensure that when the trigger was finally pulled, there would be no doubt left behind. The payment reflected that expectation. It wasn't just money for a killing. It was compensation for silence, precision, and the risk that comes with touching a man whose name carried weight across the entire American Mafia. Killing Luciano was not just removing a person. It was interfering with a system. And the people behind the order knew that if the system reacted badly, the assassin would be the first to absorb the shock. That was why the job came with one unspoken condition. There would be no protection after, no extraction, no public defense. Once the trigger was pulled, the man who did it would be alone. In Mafia logic, that meant two things. Either the planners believed Luciano's death would stabilize everything, or they were prepared to sacrifice the assassin if it didn't. From the beginning, this was not just a test of skill. It was a test of judgment. The man following Luciano understood that. Each day he waited, the weight of the decision grew heavier. The longer he observed, the clearer it became that this was not an ordinary target. Luciano moved through the city with a quiet confidence that suggested more than security. It suggested consequence. By the time the 12th day arrived, the order was still valid. The opportunity was still there. And the choice had become more dangerous than the act itself. For 12 days, Lucky Luciano moved through New York as if nothing in the world was waiting to end him. There were no dramatic convoys, no constant wall of guards, no visible signs of fear. He followed routines that felt almost deliberate in their normality. The same streets, the same pauses, The same quiet confidence that came from believing the system around you would absorb any threat before it reached your body. From a distance, Luciano looked exposed. From closer observation, he looked insulated. His protection didn't announce itself. It appeared and disappeared naturally, as if the city itself adjusted around him. Men stepped into doorways at the right moments. Conversations paused when he passed. Eyes lifted, then looked away. These were not bodyguards in formation. They were signals, reminders that he was never truly alone. The assassin learned more by watching what didn't happen than what did. No one approached Luciano aggressively. No one challenged him in public. People altered their behavior without being told to. That kind of response doesn't come from fear of immediate violence. It comes from understanding consequences that don't need to be explained. Each day created at least one moment where the job could have ended. A car door left open too long. A walk taken without visible backup. A pause on a sidewalk where noise could have covered a gunshot. The mechanics were there. The risk was manageable. The problem was what followed. The longer the assassin observed, the more the target began to feel less like a man and more like a fixed point. Removing him did not feel like erasing a weakness. It felt like pulling a support beam out of a structure whose collapse pattern was unknown. Luciano was not acting like someone about to be replaced. He moved like someone whose absence would be noticed immediately by everyone. What unsettled the assassin most was Luciano's awareness without paranoia. He didn't scan faces obsessively. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. That calm suggested something deeper than courage. It suggested certainty. The kind that comes from knowing that even if a shot is fired, the consequences will not favor the shooter. By the end of the 12th day, the assassin knew every angle of Luciano's routine. He knew where to stand. He knew how long it would take, and he knew that pulling the trigger would be the easiest part of the job. Living with what came after was the part no one had paid him to understand. The moment arrived quietly. No tension, no rush. Just a clean alignment of circumstances that professionals wait their entire careers for. Lucky Luciano was alone long enough. The angle was right. The distance was forgiving. There were no witnesses who would matter and no variables that couldn't be managed. In the language of the underworld, this was what they called a gift. The assassin felt no adrenaline. That was the strangest part. After 12 days of observation, the act itself seemed small, almost mechanical. One movement, one sound, and everything would reset. The payment would be justified. The order would be closed. The city would adjust. On paper, this was the safest moment to act. And yet, time slowed. Not because Luciano sensed anything. He didn't. He moved the way he always did. Unhurried, unprotected in appearance, entirely unconcerned. The hesitation came from the other side of the sightline. From a realization that had nothing to do with aim or courage. The assassin wasn't afraid of missing. He was afraid of succeeding. Killing Luciano did not feel like the end of a problem. It felt like the beginning of one that no one had mapped out. The longer the assassin stood there, the clearer it became that Luciano was not the final obstacle in anyone's plan. He was the stabilizer. Removing him would not crown a winner. It would scatter responsibility. And whoever fired the shot would become the only fixed target left. There was also something else, harder to define. Luciano didn't carry himself like a man protected by luck. He moved like someone protected by expectation, as if the world around him had already decided that certain things simply would not happen, and that anyone who tried to force them would pay in ways that never made headlines. The trigger remained untouched. Seconds stretched into an unbearable clarity. Every argument for action had already been rehearsed and defeated by a single unanswered question. What happens to the man who kills Lucky Luciano when the system turns on him next? The assassin stepped away without noise, without drama. Not because the job was impossible, but because, in that moment, it felt suicidal in a way no contract had warned him about. Some targets die easily. Others make you understand too late that survival sometimes means refusing to win. That was the closest Luciano ever came to death during those 12 days. and the fact that he never knew it only made the decision heavier. By the fourth realization, the decision was already made, even if the assassin hadn't admitted it yet. Killing Lucky Luciano no longer felt like completing a contract. It felt like volunteering to absorb consequences no one else wanted to carry. Luciano was not just another boss at the top of a pyramid. He was the hinge holding several rival interests in balance. His presence prevented wars precisely because everyone hated him equally. Remove him, and that shared pressure vanished. Alliances would fracture, old grudges would resurface, and when the violence began, every faction would search for someone to blame. The man who pulled the trigger would be the easiest answer. The assassin understood something the planners either ignored or chose not to face. Power vacuums don't stay empty. They collapse inward. Whoever killed Luciano wouldn't become invisible. He would become symbolic. Proof that the rules had been broken. Proof that retaliation was permitted. Proof that chaos had a starting point. There was also the problem of succession. No single figure stood ready to replace Luciano cleanly. Too many candidates. Too many overlapping claims. Too much uncertainty. That meant Luciano's death wouldn't end an era. It would suspend it in violence. And suspended systems look for scapegoats to regain order. What truly sealed the decision, however, was the behavior of the men around Luciano. They weren't guarding him like a target. They were orbiting him like a center of gravity. Kill him, and that gravity would snap outward violently. Anyone even suspected of involvement would be torn apart, not out of justice, but necessity. The assassin realized he had been hired not just to kill a man, but to carry the historical weight of that act alone. No protection, no recognition, no loyalty afterward. Just silence and an open-ended future filled with enemies who needed someone to punish. Walking away was no longer cowardice. It was strategy. In that moment, refusing to pull the trigger wasn't a failure of nerve. It was the clearest reading of the board. Luciano survived not because no one wanted him dead, but because killing him created more danger than leaving him alive. And in the Mafia, the most rational choice is often the one that looks like defiance, until everyone else realizes you were the only one thinking far enough ahead. The decision not to pull the trigger did not end the job. It ended the illusion that Lucky Luciano was merely a target waiting for the right moment. When the assassin disappeared from the plan without explanation, something shifted. Quietly, irreversibly. There was no report back, no demand for payment, no attempt to renegotiate. The silence itself became the message. In the Mafia, contracts fail all the time. What doesn't happen is this: a man with time, access, and opportunity choosing to walk away completely. That kind of refusal forces everyone involved to rethink their assumptions. Luciano never received confirmation that he had been followed, but rumors moved differently than facts. Whispers surfaced that someone had watched him for days and decided not to act. No one could verify it. That was the danger. If even a professional assassin could see Luciano up close and conclude that killing him was a mistake, what did that say about the risks everyone else was taking by merely opposing him? The planners behind the order understood the implication immediately. They had failed without being exposed, the worst possible outcome. The job wasn't botched, it was abandoned. And abandonment suggests foresight, not incompetence. It meant someone had looked at the future and chosen not to step into it. Luciano's position hardened without a single move on his part. Men recalibrated their behavior instinctively. Ambitions softened. Conflicts were postponed. Nobody wanted to be the next person who tested a boundary that even hired killers refused to cross. The assassin vanished into anonymity, not celebrated, not punished publicly, but functionally erased from the conversation. That, too, was part of the lesson. In Luciano's world, silence was not neutral. It was active. It rewarded restraint and buried mistakes without explanation. In the end, the most powerful consequence was this: Lucky Luciano never had to survive an attack. He survived a decision, one made by someone who understood that some men are protected not by guards or weapons, but by the certainty that killing them will make everything worse. The trigger was never pulled, and because of that, Luciano became something far more dangerous than a man who had escaped death. He became proof that true power is knowing when even your enemies are afraid to win. In the end, Lucky Luciano never knew how close death had come. And that was the point. No ambulance, no headlines, no scars to display as proof of survival. Just 12 days that ended without a sound, and a decision that quietly rewrote how power was measured in the American underworld. The assassin didn't fail. He calculated. He saw beyond the trigger pull and into the aftermath. A future where killing Luciano didn't bring order, only chaos, and where the man who fired the shot would become the system's sacrifice. Walking away wasn't mercy. It was self-preservation at the highest level. What followed mattered more than what didn't. Rumors hardened into belief. Belief turned into restraint. Luciano's authority grew not because he crushed an enemy, but because someone with every advantage chose not to challenge him. In a world obsessed with violence, restraint became the most convincing display of power. This wasn't a story about luck. It was about inevitability, about understanding that some figures don't need protection because removing them costs more than anyone is willing to pay. Luciano remained standing because the price of ending him was unknowable, and therefore unacceptable. Sometimes, history turns not on the shots that echo through the streets, but on the ones that never happen. And in that silence, Lucky Luciano became something far more dangerous than a man who survived an assassination. He became a man no one dared to finish,